What are you waiting for? When we read sacred scripture, we meet many holy men and women who have to wait long stretches of time for God. Think of Abraham, mentioned in our second reading, and his wife Sarah, who had to wait until their very old age before God's promise to them was fulfilled, before the long-expected child God pledged to them came to be born. Think of the Israelites who had to wait and wander for 40 years after being rescued from Egypt before arriving in the Promised Land. And think of those generations of faithful Israelites who had to wait century after century before the coming of Jesus. If we think of our own lives, we know people who have had to wait long stretches for God to answer their prayers, perhaps prayers that they've lifted up each and every day for years. Perhaps we ourselves have waited for God a long time, or are this moment waiting for some intervention, some answer from God to our needs. How did the saints of sacred scripture persevere in their waiting? How do the holy men and women today wait with such patience, such perseverance? We find the beginning of the answer to this question at the beginning of our second reading from the letter of Hebrews, where we are taught that faith is the realization of what is hoped for. When we wait for something, we hope for that something to arrive. And when we are waiting for God, we are waiting for Him to come into our lives in a more fully realized way. But while we are waiting, God gives us a precious gift, and that gift is faith. And faith is already a taste of what we're waiting for. It's a partial realization of God's presence, power, and love in our lives. The truth is, we are willing to wait for that which we love. If you love the Red Sox or the Celtics or the Patriots, chances are you are willing to wait hours in line to get a good seat. If you love a particular musical act, the same is true. A great test of our love is waiting. My mother put my father to this test when they were dating because she was late to every date that they set. And the fact that my father waited was a sign that he loved the woman who would become my mother. We all have to wait. And waiting is a test of our love. God sometimes calls us to wait a very long time. And it's not because He does not love us, but rather it's often because He wants our love of Him to grow. And He is at work in us while we're waiting, even when we can't feel it, when we can't see it. He gives us gifts, faith, hope, and love to enable us to persevere. The waiting is worth it because ultimately the one we are waiting for is Jesus. When you have nothing to wait for in your life, you also have nothing to hope for. And we get a little glimpse of that in the second parable Jesus offers us in our gospel. When the head servant begins to believe that his master isn't coming back, what happens? That head servant begins to get drunk and he begins to beat his fellow servants. When we have nothing to hope for, nothing to wait on, our soul shrivels and we escape reality. Alcohol's just one way. There are many. And we wind up visiting our despair on others in cruelty. Whereas when we wait for God, when we persevere in patience, calling out to Him, waiting for Him, He fills us with gifts. He fills us with a patience for others, for ourselves, for our affairs. Waiting for God is worth it. If you find yourself waiting for God today, this gospel is for you. God is telling you not to give up. He's telling you to keep waiting, keep hoping, because your hope, your faith will pay off and will be a light to others even if you can't see it. Faith is the realization of what is hoped for. God is already at work in you, doing marvelous things. He's worth waiting for.